Though as he was listening to the Twi'lek recordings, he fell asleep. For better or worse, he ended up waking up when one of the saucers that belonged to Hondo intercepted him upon his arrival from hyperspace. Anakin woke up with bloodshot eyes and then ran to the cockpit to tell them that he was just here for some food and drinks. He heard that Hondo threw the best parties in this side of the galaxy. He was given permission to land, but that didn't mean he would just get permission to live. As the ship landed in the landing zone, Hondo came out to see the man who claimed he had the best parties around. Hondo definitely didn't disagree, he just wanted to see if he knew the man who said it. To his surprise, he wasn't a man, just a 15-year-old boy. Hondo was so surprised, but he looked a little closer and saw that Anakin's eyes were bloodshot. He let out an egregious laugh and told the boy to come with him. He really had him for a moment. Hondo really thought that Anakin was some type of bounty hunter or whatever trying to kill one of his men. Regardless of their crimes, Hondo's men were his, which is why they were loyal to him as pirates. If they had issues with others, Hondo would just smooth talk his way out of the situation for them, and in turn, the pirate would be eternally loyal to him. It was a good way to do business. Hondo put his arm around Anakin's shoulder and handed him a drink. Anakin knew he could drink this because Hondo was just drinking out of it. The smell was horrible and the taste was horrific, but it's alright. Anything to get the job done for Jabba. They talked a little bit before walking into the building and seeing a massive party unfolding. Anakin realized that Hondo thought he was out of his mind, so he played the part of the fool and acted like he was in a haze. Hondo got Anakin over to a seat with a laugh and told the boy to eat up. They had the best sobering food in the galaxy over here. It would help him mellow out before he got back up, if you know what I mean. Hondo slapped Anakin's back harder and harder before stumbling away, forgetting all about the drink he gave to Anakin. The young bounty hunter brought everything he needed with him, and in his pocket, he could feel the fob vibrating. Before he landed, he looked at the hologram of his target to just make sure he knew he got the right guy. Everything was set up perfectly for him. The party continued swelling around him as he took it all in. This was the life. Maybe not being alone, but being a person on his own. He felt like a superhero. As he was sitting here, one of the pirates got up and lost his mind. He got into a fight with another guy at the bar. Hondo looked on amusedly as everyone in the bar turned their attention. Anakin knew it was now or never. He felt the fob and looked around. It vibrated as he got closer to the person he was looking for. As he saw the man, he was holding a drink in his hand. He wasn't paying any attention. The guy started urging the two of them to fight. After the first call for a fight rang out, a couple more did, and the first one was thrown. Anakin pulled a small vial from his pants pocket, bringing it up to his hand level, and twisting the cap off slowly between his thumb and pointer finger. A couple men brushed by him as they went to help out the man who was intertwined in the fight. This pushed Anakin forward, and he stood up on his tippy toes so he didn't slam onto the guy he was here to kill. The pirates all got locked into the fight as it turned into a brawl between the multiple people. Anakin yelled out, telling them to get him. It didn't matter who was on it. Anakin said it in the right ear of the man he was here for. The man turned over. Skywalker slid his body in front of himself and poured the vial into the drink. Uh-oh, the mixture wasn't the same color of the drink, and then he remembered that on the label, it said it would take 25 seconds to melt into a drink. Hey, that's what you get when you pay for low-quality poisons. It would do the job, but you might get busted. That was a risk of paying low prices. It was a great way to swindle people on Tatooine. Anakin saw it, and his eyes looked from the cup to the turning head of the man. Anakin slid the vial back into his pocket, wiping off his hands, and he turned to the man who was with him. The timer had begun. 24, 23, 22. Anakin got the man's attention, asking him who he had odds on. He shrugged his shoulders and said neither. He was friends with both of them. Anakin told him that he could put credits on it, and the pirate mind went off and he agreed to the idea. Instead of Anakin's mind, he was counting down 17, 16, 15. The man asked how many credits, and Anakin told him they should do 150 credits on the winner. The pirate was about to look down at his drink, and Anakin pulled some credits from his pocket and tossed them up in his hand and caught them. The pirate smiled and told him he had 150 on the guy on the left. Anakin watched the man who he would be betting on get crushed in the face. 9, 8, 7. Anakin told him to double or nothing. This was easy for him. He took the bet, and Anakin slammed the credits onto the counter and threw his hand forward. The pirate contorted his face, and Anakin told him he'd only pay up if they shook on it. The pirate looked at him and took a deep breath. 4, 3, 2, 1. Anakin and the pirate shook their hands together, and Skywalker gripped him hard and swung his hand back and forth. The pirate was clearly annoyed with it, and when they broke off, Anakin's guy had actually knocked out the other one. The worst part for the pirate is that it was a smaller man and a much larger one. But the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The pirate was so annoyed as he poured the drink and slammed the empty cup onto the table. He handed Skywalker 350 credits and told him that it was a good bet. Maybe next time he'd clear him out. Anakin winked and he told him he looked forward to it. Skywalker knew what he needed to do, and he needed to get out of here. The fight was intensifying as it spread to other members of the crew. Anakin ducked and weaved a couple people as he bashed someone's nose in and moved away from the fight. He could feel the fob still beeping in his pocket, so he turned around and watched the pirate he was just next to cough on the table as he slowly slouched over. The fob stopped beating and Anakin grinned as a confirmed kill. Anakin walked out slowly before quickly running through the courtyard to his vessel and jumping in. A couple pirates realized that the friend had been killed and they chased after Skywalker. Hondo kind of figured it out, but why start a fight with the Hutts? If the bounty hunter was killed or captured on Florham, it wouldn't be a big deal. Plus, if the kid was hungry enough, he'd end up here on Florham again anyways. No issue, he could get his revenge then. Anakin was chased by a couple stray pirate ships, but he jumped the hyperspace by the time they were out in the atmosphere. When he returned to Tatooine after falling asleep in the bay area of his ship, while listening to more recordings of the nameless Twi'lek, he pulled the ship down to Jabba's palace. When he came into the throne room, he was mostly quiet. There were a couple people in the background talking to each other, but most of it was hidden under a smooth song playing through the speakers. Anakin came back with the biggest smile on his face, telling Jabba he killed the guy and he did it in secrecy. Jabba loved the energy, but he told Skywalker there were no more contracts for him at the moment, giving him the suggestion to freely move about in the throne room with the other bounty hunters. Anakin bowed and turned around, scanning the dark room. There were a couple people playing games of sabacc and other gambling games. He sauntered over into the darkness and leaned against a column looking in on the action. As he was standing there, someone jabbed their fingers into his side and he nearly jumped through the ceiling. Anakin turned back with fear in his eyes, but then he saw a familiar's face, and his fury dissipated into joy. He asked Zena what she was doing here, with a wild smile across his face. She smiled and said that he invited her. Anakin looked away for a moment and then remembered that he did indeed invite her. She tugged on his hand and pulled him back to where she was sitting. It was 2 seats in the corner of one of the cutouts, and it had a great view of the game of sabacc, with renowned up-and-coming bounty hunter Cad Bane. Anakin noted the massive hat on the bounty hunter, and thought it was kinda goofy, but not in a bad way. For a bounty hunter to have a unique slogan or call sign, that was important. Bane had that. Anakin turned his attention back to Zena, and asked her about working for the Hutts. She was ecstatic. She explained that she was able to blackmail into the apartment complex with that one guy, and Grandma Pax had a place to stay. Anakin inquired about how she was able to blackmail someone. She leaned back and said it was a complicated situation. The guy who owned it liked to hit on her, and considering she was like Anakin, 15, that was a big no-no. Despite the rugged rules of Tatooine, most gangs, criminals, and just about anyone didn't stand for that. So Zena was able to threaten his life for it if he didn't give her and her grandma a place to stay. Anakin was upset that the owner of the complex did that, but at the very least, the blackmail would buy her some time to earn some credits. He saw a bit of her cynical side where she said it wouldn't buy him any time. He would just be killed at some point, but she liked the idea of making him stress out over it. He wasn't the only one she did it to. It was whoever happened to exist within a radius of him type of thing. Anyways, Zena broke off from the topic. He gave her the creeps just thinking about it. She asked about his most recent mission, and he told her all about the pirate fight and the poison, and she had to admit she was very impressed. But not for nothing, she did encourage him to become a bounty hunter, and he seemed to live up to the hype of it. She toyed with him, suggesting that he didn't look scary enough to be a bounty hunter, but not for nothing, it was more fun than it was an insult. Anakin asked her what she would be doing here with Jabba, and she admitted that while it was a bit tantalizing, she'd be working for the Hutt cartel. She was both a little nervous and a lot excited. She'd have the chance to go to the core and run spice. Obviously, it'd be more dangerous, but because of her stature, she'd be the perfect size to do stealthy missions in high-risk areas. Working as spice runners in the Hutt cartel was much different than Anakin's contract with them as a bounty hunter. Aside from a few situations where he might need to have backup, Anakin would pretty much be going in alone. As for Zena, she'd be assigned to a squad of spice runners and go from there. This was much larger than low-life spice running. It was work for the Hutt cartel, so she needed to be at her best, just as everyone else around her. They could be snitches and get you killed, or you could perform well and no one in your squad would complain. At 15, the stakes would be high, but for Anakin and Zena, the future would be bright and full of adventure. When both Anakin and Zena were 19, their respective fields of work would be completely changed. The Clone Wars had begun, and it was no longer a safe galaxy to work in. Neither field was safe to work in to begin with, but with the Republic and the new Separatist movement interlocked in the galaxy-wide war, the arena had just changed. Anakin and Zena were closer than ever before. For the previous 4 years, they were drawn together more, and they began to rely on each other more than they had anyone else, aside from the people that raised them. Zena's grandmother passed away when she was 17, and despite the difficulties it left for her, she was able to heal through it with her friend nearby. It was the same thing Zena was able to do for him when it came to the loss of Shmi and Jalen. As two individuals working for Jabba, and at the top of their individual game, they rarely saw each other. Neither of them were the best in the galaxy, but they were performing at their best of their abilities, since they started working for Jabba. Something noticeable to Zena was Anakin's desire to be the best bounty hunter he could possibly be. This was entirely identifiable by his decision to choose bounty hunting over anything else. He never sat still, and he never stayed on Tatooine for so long. Unless, of course, there was a job to be done. He liked to think of himself as loving and caring towards Zena, which wasn't inaccurate. There was just always one thing that came before anything else. His loyalty to the Syndicate was based solely off the opportunity he was able to seize from his lifestyle. Of course, being a bounty hunter seemed solid in theory, but it required much more effort than was being paid back. Anakin had to continually update his vessel, his arsenal, some of his outfits, and pay for fuel so he could move between planets and get jobs done effectively. All of these were simply necessities for the job. Obviously, outfits didn't seem the most important thing, but truthfully, if he had a job in the Corps, he needed to fit it. He needed to match the style. The Hutts moved him all around the galaxy. It was a rare sight for a local kid to be such a gunslinger. Anakin thought it was talent, but it was much more than just talent. But a good gunslinger didn't make a top bounty hunter. Before Jango Fett's death on Geonosis, he was the top slinger in the galaxy. That title now belonged to Cad Bane, who had earned his colors in the years that had passed. Anakin was consistently vying for that top spot with the top bounty hunters, but that became increasingly difficult. With the war starting, there were more people in the galaxy trying to make their way with the syndicates and earn some credits. Despite the Republic using bounty hunters sparsely, the Separatists were hiring more often, and Cad Bane was getting in on that cash flow. It forced Skywalker to try and keep pace with the rest of the bounty hunters. Zena, on the other hand, was spending more time on Tatooine and Outer Rim worlds than not. She wasn't as busy as Skywalker was, and she was less interested in the consistency of her career path. Being a spice runner got her the basics, and that's all she cared about. She didn't have a home in Tatooine. The place where her grandmother lived was given away to a poor family, something that Zena did personally. Her reputation as a ghost continued to be her calling card, if you will. She did her job, and then she vanished. While she was never reliant on Anakin, she did see his change over the past couple years, never believing her place to change him or fix him, if you will, rather just consistently observing who he was. It didn't dissuade her from trusting him anymore, just made her a little bit more cautious around him. Because she didn't have an official place to stay, she found her comfort on the rooftops of buildings, looking at the moons and the stars. Something that always stuck with her was a scar, one that was shared between both her and Skywalker. It wasn't intentional, but one mission their jobs intersected, and he was chasing down someone as she was leaving the facility on Hypori. Her squad had finished their spice run, and they were preparing to deliver the products to Nal Hutta when a man ran past her. She happened to be in the way, and he had a knife with him. It slashed her across her palm, and she tripped him. It all happened so fast. Running at what seemed to be super speeds, Anakin was behind the man. He leapt forward and jumped on the man he was pursuing, beating him to a pulp, but not before being cut across the back of his hand. Zena had a scar on the palm of her right hand, and Anakin had one on the back of his right hand. It was a way for them to simply remember each other. So in that way, they were always with each other, no matter where they were. Something Anakin would do, if she wasn't around when he was back from a mission, was leave little treasure hunts behind. Sometimes there would be little gifts for her, things he found off-world or even trophies he'd acquired. She thought it to be endearing, and she kept each of these trinkets in her backpack, along with all of her other personal effects. Anakin had always wanted to give a girl a shawl that had belonged to him his entire life. It was his mother's, but she gave it to him when he was a boy to comfort him. He'd always dreamed of giving that to someone he loved. So, the trinkets to him were his only way of doing that, considering the shawl burned up in the house that exploded. At the moment, Skywalker was returning from Zygeria. Jabba sent him there to kill a slaver who disobeyed the Syndicate rules. It was a little mix-up, but Jabba had it out for the cat person for the longer part of a couple years. With Cad Bane taking up missions with the Separatists, it seemed imperative that the local boy take care of his little issue regarding the slaver. Just for fun, Anakin brought the man's head back on a silver platter for the Syndicate leader. He wanted to continue proving his worth to Jabba, and he continued to do that here. Jabba was very pleased, and he paid up the little price and sent Skywalker away. Anakin returned to the city and searched for Zena, finding her a mere 30 minutes after landing. It was close to sunset, and he saw her looking for a place to sleep. She smiled when she saw him, and waved him up as she climbed up to the side of the building and set down a folded blanket to keep sand off her clothes. When he got to the roof, he smiled and asked her how she was. Her warm smile was the best part of coming back. She tugged at his hand and pulled him over towards her, and he got down next to her. They sat with their faces not more than a foot away from each other. There wasn't a word said, but the presence of each other was all that needed to be said. Zena told Anakin that she waited for this moment for so long. How many rotations had it been since they last saw each other? More than 100 at the very least. She wrapped her hand behind his head and pulled it closer as their foreheads met in the middle. The warmth cooled the heat left behind by the setting suns.
I've missed you.
Well, it's about time you said something. It's been too long.
I know. I believe there won't be many more jobs for a little while. Unless it comes from the Separatists.
I'm sure it'll be a good break.
Perhaps it will be. Only time will tell.
Let's focus away from that. I heard an expression not long ago from a planet I visited for the Syndicate, and I think it fits you perfectly.
Oh? What would that be?
You are as pure as the driven snow, my love.
What would that mean?
She leaned back and smiled at him with a twinkle in her eyes. There was always something so remarkable about the way that she looked, though he had to admit that something felt off. He was unsure of what it was, but typically Zena wouldn't pull away from talking about bounty hunting. Maybe she just wanted some quality time not thinking about anything other than the moment they were in. Both of them were safe from their deadly and highly taxing jobs, and truthfully, that's all that mattered. As long as they were okay, there was nothing in the universe that could slow them down. Zena repositioned her bag to lean up nicely against a little hutch at the top of the building. The two of them leaned back and she pointed up at the stars, and she asked him where his favorite place in the galaxy was. Anakin pondered over his answers and came to the conclusion that it was right here. That was a perfectly curated response. They kept their conversation away from their careers, and they focused on each other, the soul of the other, their philosophical thoughts on life, the stars, the galaxy. They avoided politics of the ensuing war, and it was peaceful. They were cozy next to each other, so small in such a large galaxy, before either of them fell asleep. Zena cried a little. She asked Anakin if he ever thought of running away. He told her that he didn't really ever think of it. She just nodded her head and smiled before they fell asleep. Zena and Anakin pulled a little hood over them, one that would block out the suns in the morning. It would garner them some more sleep considering they had been up all night pretty much. When the morning came, they were both pretty tired, but they got up and moved down to a local cantina for some food. During their brunch, Anakin would be summoned to Jabba's palace. There was a new contract, and Anakin was very excited about it. The contract was exclusively Tatooine, so he wouldn't have to leave the planet again. It should be pretty simple, too. The way it was brought up over the little communication is that he'd be dealing with a lowlife. Zena smiled, content that Anakin would stay on planet. That was important to her. When Anakin arrived at the palace, he was strapping up the belts on his holster, and when his turn was up, he stepped before the almighty Jabba. The quest was simple. Someone had been stealing from the Syndicate. Tragically, it was someone that Skywalker was familiar with. Considering this was someone who was brought into the Hutt Syndicate by him, he was being dispatched to deal with it. Anakin's heart sunk into his stomach when he saw the hologram of Zena pop up. She was a spice runner, and one of Jabba's henchmen noted that her shipments continued to have missing grams. These weren't large numbers, but they added up over the years. Anakin couldn't believe it. He didn't understand, but Jabba made it extremely clear. His job was to kill her, no mercy. It was either loyalty to his friend or loyalty to the Syndicate. Anakin took the mission and left the throne room. As he made his way to the hangar, he stopped in the stairwell and contemplated everything he had known up until this point. He served the Hutts, and they were good to him, but Zena was so much to him as well. What mattered most to him? Anakin took the hologram and brought it into the vessel and flew back to the city. Anakin was taking his time with his endeavor, and as he returned to the city and finally got a courage to leave the ship, he had made his decision. By the time he actually stepped off the ramp, it was starting to become nighttime, which would make this task a little harder. Zena seemed off, and perhaps she was worried about this. She must have known it was coming. Suppose she did. Anakin didn't want to lose her trust. It was something that she had expressed so much over the past couple years of its importance to her. He went to the location they were last at, and sure enough, her backpack was there. But she wasn't, so Anakin looked around for her. His heart was racing. He had come to his conclusion. But could he truly do it? Could he go the path he wanted and throw everything away? So much was at stake in this moment. He called her name with a dull whisper, his voice cracking under the pressure. Trust was so big to her. Had he broken her trust? He was unsure. He heard rumbling from a couple cans from the alleyway, very similar to the one they were in when they first met. Anakin walked down the alleyway a little cautiously, afraid that perhaps she had turned on him. What a twist that would be. His anxiety rose. He looked around, slowing down when he came to her jacket. That was odd. He reached down to grab it, and he felt the little jab under his right hand. He pulled back and saw one of the trinkets he had given her. It was a poison dart he got from his only job with Jango Fett. Blood rushed his head, as fury ripped out of his chest. His whisper vanished, and he called out her name, demanding to know where she was. Believing that she'd intentionally tried to poison him, he pulled his blaster from his holster and then turned the corner. He saw a shadow dart around the alleyway, and without missing a beat, he fired. 3 shots echoed out into the night, and he ran forward, believing he saw her clipped. Anakin ran forward and stumbled as he slipped into the sands before sliding around the corner of the alleyway. A sandstorm was coming. He saw blood on the wall, showing that he must have landed a hit. Anakin ran out into the sands and saw a couple footsteps, but just as Zena Pax had always been, like a ghost, the footsteps vanished. Anakin pulled his pistol and shot out into the air, firing in every direction as the sandstorm covered his body. Blinded by the winds and the airs, he ducked back into the alleyway to examine what would likely kill him. And then he realized that he wasn't feeling any different. As he ran back to the jacket, he was surprised. Typically, Jango's darts kicked in by this point, and when he realized he wasn't feeling any different, he ran back to the jacket. As he got to the jacket, he saw the poison dart was empty. The actual poison inside the dart was right next to the dart itself. Anakin realized what he had done. He turned back and looked for Zena, hoping that she would magically reappear. Trust was always so important to her, and without that trust, then there was nothing. Was there a secret message in what she said? As pure as driven snow? Renvar, perhaps, or even Megiddo? He didn't know. His eyes drifted back down towards the jacket, and he slowly picked it up. his anger and his panic slowing down, his heart slipping further into his stomach. He pulled the jacket to his nose, and his mind was filled with countless memories within a moment. His fist balled around the corners of the jacket, forming tighter and tighter, the more the seconds passed by. Skywalker looked down and then stood up. His eyes were heavy, yet no tears escaped from them. His heart was left mangled, but he had no one else to blame but himself. He had chosen his path. Zena never wanted him dead. She perhaps wanted to run away with him. She knew the bounty was on her end, and as she knew that chances are that Jabba would force Anakin to choose her or him. She probably put the dart there with it because his reaction would tell her of his intentions. If he was calm and collected, he would notice that there was no way that she would actually harm him. It was a very smart play made by her. What made the tragedy even more heart-wrenching is that his ghost, Zena, was only taking away from the Syndicate to give to others. Every time she ran spice, she took a couple grams and gifted them to the poorest people in the streets of Mos Espa. These individuals could use the spice and sell it back to others. Typically, Zena gave it to small families in need of food, because in most cases, aside from one or two, the family would sell the spice back to the Syndicate for a solid price and they would feed themselves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to help people get on their feet a little. Zena just wanted to help those around her, and she wished that Anakin would have stayed the path she believed he was once on. Maybe she had misjudged his character when they were younger, but she always believed he was good at heart. Perhaps he would be able to find his path later on, but there would be no more Anakin and Zena, or Pax and Skywalker. She was hopeful for the chances, but they were gone. So just as she was before, always acting as a ghost, she vanished to the sandstorm. Anakin had no proof of her death, so he had to hope that Jabba would buy the story. Luckily for him, Jabba would. He would see the disappearance of Zena Pax as an affirmative truth that Skywalker completed the task. So the fear Anakin had before he found her, or her jacket, was that he was throwing everything away. Truly a remarkable travesty and dilemma, as regardless of his choice, he'd be throwing everything away anyways. Choosing the Syndicate meant he would lose Zena, someone who was all he had left. Choosing Zena meant he would lose the Syndicate, something that would likely hunt him and her down, but wouldn't exhaust his resources to do so. Did she mean Pura's driven snow and the way to draw him to a snow-covered planet, or did she say it because she truly believed he was unsullied, truly pure? It was as haunting as a curiosity of her living or dying. Did she die of her wounds, or did she escape? She just vanished, which in a way worked for Skywalker. He could play it off in his own personal gain as he returned to work for Jabba, but for his mindset, he could never forget her. She was always with him, and the scar on the back of his right hand would remind him of that. It was his dominant, gunslinging hand too. The one that pulled the trigger on Zena Pax before she vanished from his life forever. Could he still hold on to those memories now that they had passed? His thoughts dwelling on the smell of her jacket. It was the last piece of her aside from her footsteps that led into the desolate sandstorm that took her from him. Anakin returned the fob to the almighty Jabba the Hutt. He was rewarded with praise from him. Instead of Skywalker's chest, he could feel twisting and turning. He looked to the side of the room. Jabba had a man frozen in carbonite to the side of the wall. He was a decoration. He'd be freed in the coming days and fed to the Sarlacc pit with a couple of other prisoners that were unlucky enough to face Jabba's wrath. The Hutt leader didn't have any missions for Anakin, but that didn't deter Skywalker from anything. He knew that he wouldn't have any jobs from the Syndicate for now. Zena knew that too, aside from the bounty on her head. So Anakin was left with nothing other than what he had said to Zena. Perhaps the Separatists were looking for bounty hunters, and sure enough they were. Anakin took the Dragon's Eye off of Tatooine, decided that he would now be leaving his past behind. He'd forget his mother, C-3PO, Jaylim, and Zena Pax. He'd become the most feared bounty hunter in the galaxy. His regret over Zena Pax only led him to become more cynical, more brooding, more evil. He would be able to truly become the bounty hunter he wanted to be now. He was talented and he was ruthless, but now decided that he could be better than Jango Fett or Cad Bane. Skywalker pressed the hyperdrive down and his vessel jumped to hyperspace. Skywalker got up from the cockpit and walked to the back of the vessel. He stood in the bay area. Inside of it, there were an arrangement of outfits, weapons, and even something he had just installed, which was a carbon freezing chamber. It was small, but it did the job. Working on his own meant he needed it, but it set him back thousands of credits and in turn cost him close to a dozen or so jobs to have been done. A lot of work for something so integral to his workflow. Anakin looked around and kicked a crate to the middle of the bay. The box shuffled across the floor, coming to a standstill on the side of the hull. His fists balled and his brows firmed. This would be so much harder than he initially realized. His eyes caught the sight of the scar tightening across his hand, and rage seethed through his body. He raised his hand and threw it forward into the wall. After the first swing, he continued going until he couldn't anymore. When he realized the little that accomplished, he fell to the ground and felt his hand trembling after having beat it into what could only be described as a bloody mess. Anakin held his hand for a moment, just to get it to stop trembling. He looked over to the crate he kicked and pulled it closer, removing the lid and pulling out some backed up patches. he felt the pain shooting from his hand into his wrist. It was pathetic. He wrapped a white cloth around his hand and looked at the back of patches before removing a couple and planting them around his knuckles. When he was finished, he pulled a small stint and injected it right above the scar on his hand. What a fool he was. His frustration and anger only continued to convince him he was being so foolish for trusting her. Once he finished taking care of his hand, he got up and moved to the cockpit, and slept until he arrived at the planet Sereno. There was a fleet present, and they hailed him upon his entrance from hyperspace. He informed them that he was here to take up a job from Count Dooku. The droids on the command deck gave him permission to land. His vessel sped through the blockade, keeping a safe distance. Moments after clearing the blockade, a wing of vulture droids would oversee his flight down to the castle. Luckily for Skywalker, he was the first one to get here. Cad Bey was on Coruscant, and he'd be doing a job for Darth Sidious soon, for a holocron heist or something. Dooku, inversely, needed heads to roll, so once the bounty hunter ship landed, he walked out. Initially, the Count thought it to be Bosk, considering the Trandoshan bounty hunter also flew a YV-666 class freighter, but it was just a boy. How odd. Dooku called out to the young man, asking for his name. Skywalker shot back with his full name, and Dooku asked where he was from. It didn't matter, but he was just simply curious. He couldn't hire any scum for this job. He needed it to be done efficiently. Anakin told him he was from Tatooine, and he was one of the top prospects on the planet. Truthfully, that wasn't saying much. Tatooine had plenty of scum. Tons of people who wanted to make it. But they couldn't, because they were just wannabes. Anakin didn't have that vibe. He carried himself with poise and confidence. His boots clicked as he walked down the ramp of his ship and stopped. A slight sway of his hips had him looking ready to pull his pistol. A typical cool guy stance, if you will. Skywalker could likely do that job. Not that it mattered to Dooku. He would get it done one way or another. He tossed Skywalker a fob and told him the mission details. He was going to Belbringi to capture the representative of the planet. Anakin looked on in curiosity because Dooku just stopped after that. He expressed that any means was necessary. The only thing is, the representative could not be harmed. Dooku continued to tell Skywalker that the fob would vibrate when the Separatists arrived. He would have 20 seconds to vacate before the commando droids entered the facility. Anakin tried to understand what the purpose of this was, but then it registered that Dooku was forcing a neutral system to see the Separatists as heroes, as if the Republic sent a bounty hunter to capture the representative of the planet. Before Skywalker left, Dooku gave him a warning. The Republic had been trying to sway Belbringi to their side of the war effort. If they were to notice the representative being captured, they might send their own commandos. Anakin nodded his head and turned back to his vessel. He set coordinates for the planet and departed. Before his arrival, he picked out his outfits and so forth. He gathered everything he wanted. Skywalker had a jacket that he always loved to wear when he was near the inner rim or the core. It was more up to their standards. The truth is, he stole it after one of his first assassinations in the mid-rim. He took it from the guy's closet because the man he assassinated was pretty much the same size as him. Anakin grabbed his K-16 blaster and spun it around in his fingers before putting it into his holster. His hand was stiff, and that was an issue. He couldn't be playing a game like that, so if he truly wanted to be prepared for the potential of running into Republic or Separatist forces, he needed an alternative weapon. Luckily, he was a bit of a hoarder, an organized one at that. He liked his little trinkets, and he grabbed one that he liked a lot. It was a kill on a Mandalorian mercenary. He took the wrist thingy. Anakin didn't know the technical name for it, but it shot out little grapple, which was pretty rad to him. He also pulled a slug thrower off the wall and slung the strap over his head. Anakin really began to realize how stiff his fingers were. That would be an issue. While he was ambidextrous to an extent, simply through practicing his quick draw with both hands, he realized that he'd be a bit of a disadvantage if he came into a real firefight. His hand was really bruised up, which was entirely his fault for beating the hull of his ship. Skywalker got everything he needed and decided to try and just tough it out for as long as he could. When he eventually arrived at Belbringi, he landed inside the port of the city. He just needed an easy way to escape, but that shouldn't be troublesome. The representative's palace was pretty large. It overshadowed most of the city, so he could probably manage to escape if he was clever. He just needed to be ready for potential threats. Skywalker moved into the city without being discreet. He filled in with just about everyone else, aside from the slug thrower over his shoulder. It wasn't the most common thing to be allowed in inner rim planets, considering it was considered uncivilized, but most people in Belbringi didn't care. There'd been problems with pirates in the past, and if someone could fight off those pirates, then it was not a big deal. People just assumed that he was either a pirate, or he would fight them off if they came. As long as he didn't do anything stupid, no one really paid him any mind. Skywalker walked through the streets until he got to the official building of the representative. He saw the guards standing outside of it, and he thought that was pretty silly. Having guards would do him no good. Skywalker knocked his left hand against the side of the palace as he sauntered around the large building. When he found a piece of the wall that was hollow, he put a charge next to it and blew a hole into the wall, large enough for him to jump into it. The alarms didn't sound because it was on the back side of the facility, away from the most common street areas. Anakin entered the palace and followed the sound of voices. He avoided guards and kept his eyes peeled for anything that could be a threat to him. Then he found it, the representative's family. Skywalker stalked them. The man was talking about the threats from the pirates and how they needed protection from one or the other. He was leaning towards the Republic. While his family wanted to remain neutral, Skywalker thought this would be better time than ever to walk on out and make himself known. He pulled his pistol from his belt and pointed it forward, telling them that he would make the choice for them. The representative turned around and panicked. How did this bounty hunter sneak in? The representative got in front of the family, calling for his guards. A couple of them came running quickly, but Skywalker shot them dead before blasting the control panel to the door. He then told the man that there was no negotiating. Either he would come with him or someone would die. Anakin reached out his other hand and waved the representative over, but he didn't react. Skywalker pulled the trigger and dropped one of the representative's younger family members. Probably a son or a nephew, didn't matter. He told him to come quickly or someone else might die. The representative panicked. His natural instinct was to see if the boy was alright, which was the worst mistake he could make. Skywalker was pressed for time, and he wasn't playing around. He was going to be the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, and no one would stand in his way. As he moved around the table, what appeared to be the representative's wife ran at him. Skywalker kicked the chair into her knees and shot her as she toppled over. The representative got up in a panicked state, trying to ease the bounty hunter from any more carnage. Obviously, by this point, the sounds of blaster shots got the attention of the guards, and much more. The representative told his youngest to remain calm, but how could she? 7 years old, she just watched her mother and older brother get dropped without a second thought. Skywalker pulled the representative forward, and he fell to the ground. Anakin looked down at the man and asked if he really wanted to play those games. His weapon cocking back and aimed it at the little girl standing silently in the chaos unfolding around her. The representative got to his feet and stumbled forward. The doors opened up and the guards piled in. Skywalker shoved the representative over, slapping his K-16 into the holster and pulling the slug thrower from his back and unloaded into the guards. 3 of the men dropped within the firing of the first shot. Anakin's right hand recoiled from the pain of firing the big gun. He cocked it back and unloaded another shot, tearing down a couple more guards before Skywalker cocked the weapon again and slung it back over his shoulder. His eyes looked at the representative in a way that suggested that if he didn't get up, the last of his family would be killed. The man told Anakin that the Republic would never stand for this type of behavior. Skywalker pulled the representative's wrist and tightened the grip around it. He told him that the Republic sent him to do this. He was lucky it wasn't the Syndicate. He couldn't believe this. Why would the Republic send a bounty hunter after him and his family? Skywalker pushed him forward and told him that he would be a human shield, so he better make sure his guards knew what was best for them. His name was Ambitus Rex, but Skywalker didn't care. He shoved him forward and placed his K-16 on the top of his shoulder and pointed it forward. They pressed throughout the building. Anakin was only buying time until the Separatist commandos arrived and dealt with this politician. Guards came forward and they couldn't shoot, but they could be shot, which is what Skywalker did, his pistol vibrating on the politician's shoulders as they moved throughout the lovely hall, lining the floors with dead bodies of those meant to protect the family. As they continued stalling for time, a massive blast came from behind Skywalker. He threw Ambitus into the wall and spun around the corner. When Representative Rex got up, he looked over and called for help. But when Republic commandos entered the facility, he realized that the setup had been complete. The clones asked if he was alright, but they would never hear the answer. Anakin rolled around the corner, unloading a blast from his slug thrower, sending one of the troopers into the wall. He pushed forward as the clones tried to react appropriately, firing at him. Skywalker effortlessly evaded their shots, as if he could see them before they came at him. He pulled out a small vibra blade and turned it on, slashing forward with his left hand. He pulled out his pistol and used it as a hand-to-hand combat weapon, smashing a clone's visor so hard it broke, sending glass into the trooper's eyes. The yell of pain was all the more pleasure for the bounty hunter. Anakin jabbed the blade into the necks of one of the troopers, before fending off an attack made by the boss of the crew. It was fisticuffs, and Skywalker's trained like Republic commandos were. He was beat back and thrown to the ground, and pinned down. Another commando, one who had glass in his eyes, prepared to stun Skywalker. Anakin looked for a way out of it. Then he remembered. He was so grateful for Jango and their mission together. A small rocket boost launched Anakin's knee forward. It hurt like hell when he connected with the edge of the commando's backpack, but it threw him off of Skywalker. Anakin kicked forward, sweeping his legs out from under the commando in front of him. He pulled the weapon of the trooper and tried to fire it before realizing that Republic commando gear could be only used by Republic commandos. It was a hand recognition software. Skywalker whipped the weapon across the room as it clipped the boss in the head. Anakin grabbed his blade and jabbed it through the open visor of the commando on the ground, before turning back and seeing the boss grab his weapon, preparing to fire a lethal round into the bounty hunter. Skywalker shot his grapple. It didn't wrap up the commando, it went straight through his leg. Well, that would have to suffice. Skywalker slipped forward and grabbed the pistol, firing into the commando's chest a number of times until his body slipped over and fell. Anakin took a deep breath and got up. Footsteps could be heard behind him as he turned back, and a dozen or so guards came running forward. He grabbed the dead commando's droid popper and rolled it forward. As the bomb went off, electrocuting each of the guards, he charged a thermal detonator and tossed it at their feet. The panic in their eyes as they were frozen in place was all the more fitting to Skywalker. The explosion killed them all. He turned back to grab Ambatus Rex. They continued through the halls, and as they did, his pocket started to buzz. He'd make this a good show. He brought Representative Rex to the top of the building. The man thought he was about to die, but Skywalker just told him that he would haunt his every night. He kicked him to the ground and looked for his ship, or at least that's what he said he was doing. Until, oh no, the Separatists, who would have ever guessed them showing up? Skywalker shot a couple of the commando droids, dropping one or two of them before throwing a smoke bomb and pretending to grab Ambatus Rex, but slipping. It was all a timing thing, because as he did this, a small vessel was flying away, so it looked like once the smoke cleared, Anakin escaped into the air. There was a rope loosely hanging around Ambatus's legs, as if Anakin were to pull him into the ship with his legs first. Skywalker, on the other hand, jumped off the roof and prayed that his grapple would land. It did, however the landing wasn't pleasant. He slammed into a couple pedestrians on the way to the ground, but it cushioned his fall, helping him not break all of his bones in the process. Aside from the rough landing, Anakin was able to escape Bill Bringing perfectly fine. Ambatus Rex, on the other hand, had to play with the devil. It was only right. While his family didn't deserve the pain they incurred, Ambatus Rex was by definition a corrupt ruler. It wouldn't be fair to call him a representative or a politician because he was much worse than that. The next 3 years of the Clone Wars would be very similar for Skywalker, being that his contract with the Hutts was pretty much extinguished. Shortly after Jabba's son was taken by the Separatists and returned by the Jedi, Count Dooku put a hit out for any bounty hunter to claim. They had to be able to kill a Jedi and deliver their body to Castle Sereno for a lump sum of 1,000,000 credits. This was something Anakin had to take up on. He didn't really see a reason why the Jedi should be treated any differently than any other bounty. The only difference was the lightsabers. But thanks to his mission with Jango, he knew how to kill them. Not every Jedi was a hero of the Republic. Not every Jedi was a master on the High Council, so those who weren't could be taken advantage of. Jango expressed that their biggest weakness was their compassion, so Skywalker used their compassion, bombing a clone barracks and then executing a master and apprentice duo on the outskirts of a world, just for sort of a sport thing. Anakin would hunt down and execute the rest of the clones at the outpost for fun as well. Maybe it wasn't the nicest thing in the galaxy to do, but he got his 1,000,000 credits for it, well actually technically 2. Anakin during the duration of the Clone Wars would become more distanced from the Syndicate, which didn't affect him as much as he thought it would. Truthfully, he sucked up to Dooku a little bit, because he believed that Count Dooku would at some point be in control over the galaxy. This allowed Cad Bane and Anakin to become good friends, which for bounty hunters meant they respected each other and stayed away from each other's missions. Unless it was a collaborative effort, Anakin continued to become more cynical as the Clone Wars transpired, but he got a kick out of killing clones. He may have looked up to Jango, but he was disgusted in the Republic taking advantage of Jango's Geno. To him, the clones weren't even half the men that Jango was. Of course, this was simply because Anakin never stayed around the clones long enough to see them for who they really were. The war came crashing down with the rise of the Galactic Empire. Individuals like Cad Bane returned to serving the Syndicates due to their anti-establishment stances. While Bane worked for Sidious, it wasn't the same as working for the Empire, so he returned to the Pikes, Hutts, Black Suns, and Zygerians for work. Skywalker, on the other hand, known as one of the best in the galaxy at the game, decided to take some leave. Due to having killed 2 Jedi during the war and severely injuring Council member Ki-Adi-Mundi, he racked up around 3.5 million credits. Dooku gave him an extra 1.5 million due to his job against Ki-Adi-Mundi. Nothing personal, just war. Dooku died when the war came to an end, and the death wasn't very explainable. No one even really knew what happened to him. Some said it was an assassination by the Jedi, but that couldn't be true considering they were wiped from the galaxy after a siege at Coruscant. Skywalker, instead of retiring, went into light work. In his time having worked for the CIS, he had a reputation as the Jedi Hunter, something created by the clones. The new Imperial power hired him for hunting down parties of clone troopers who went AWOL, though these tasks did include the murder of Jedi Padawans who lost their path. The payments were really good. Not as good as CIS Jedi kills paid, but 500,000 credits was doable. The entire time Skywalker continued modifying the Dragon's Eye, and saving as much as he could. When he wasn't doing jobs, he was stopping off at gambling planets around the galaxy. His favorite place was Canto Bight, but the issue is, Anakin was trying to be a big shot. Most of the tables on the planet started around 250,000 credits, and they only went up from there. This meant that if Anakin was to gamble, he'd be putting his entire fortune on the line. Luckily for him, he had a way of knowing which card would be pulled next in the game of Sabacc. There was always packed tables of roulette and craps. Of course, the big thing at Canto Bight was the racetrack. The big deals were on the lower odd fathiers and whether they would win or not. Anakin had luck on the tables, especially Sabacc and roulette. But when it came to the racetrack, he kept his bets to a minimum. Unlike the high-stakes tables inside the casino on the planet, racetrack bets started around 10,000 credits, so it was much easier for random people to get into the game. Anakin loved putting his odds on fathers with 17-1 chances of winning, or around that area. They were usually the cheapest bets to begin with, but they paid the highest if they won. Anakin only bet on them twice. The first time was a terrible failure. The father died on the track during the race. The second one, Anakin was having a long night in the casino, and he threw it away in a drunken stupor. He already threw out 750 grand on a roulette table after going up against the young gambler who was making a name for himself. He was also known as a master codebreaker as well. When Skywalker bet on the 17-1, he accidentally added a decimal point, so instead of betting 10,000 like he was hoping to, he ended up putting out 100,000, which he had, just not with him. That's kind of a big deal on Canto Bight. Their security was really big on paying up to the house if you lost a bet. If one didn't pay up, then you were locked up until someone could bring you your funds. If no one showed up by the end of the week, they would be sentenced and convicted. Canto Bight ran off of gambling alone. It was an upper-class society for a reason. Skywalker's bet may have been accidental, but with 17-1 odds, he brought home a payout of 1.8 million credits. To think that he didn't even need to almost kill a Jedi Council member to earn that much. Skywalker continued doing this little game for the next several years. He didn't really have anything else to do aside from picking up contracts of the Empire. He really began to resent the Syndicate system, considering Jabba didn't take too kindly to him not coming home anymore. There were lowlifes from Tatooine always sent out to kill him, just as he had gone out to kill Zena Pax. There was really a certain irony in that. Skywalker avoided the Hutts like a plague. Every time one of the local kids came to fight him, he would have to kill them. It wasn't fun, but it was easy. He did inversely get to loot them for stuff he liked. Sometimes he'd take a pistol or a couple credits. It was that former person still within him. Anakin had a bit of an imposter syndrome when it came to his wealth. He still thought he had to fight to stay anywhere, when in reality, he could stay anywhere he wanted. He had a solid saving of credits and he didn't spend everything, aside from at the tables of Canto Bight and sometimes Numidian Prime, which is where he met the young Lando Calrissian, who was a master of the Sabacc table, but a bit of a cheater too. Anakin liked the kid. He was well-rounded, and he had a great swagger about him, though they never spent much more time around each other.
And that's gonna end part 3. Oh, I'm not for this. Okay, I'm gonna tell you that's the video. Yeah, I'm gonna end it here, and then again, links in the description again for this channel. And then part 4. I think it's part 3 or part 4. I'll do part 4 there tonight or tomorrow for part 4. Just wrap it up. Bye for now. And the channel will be in the description for you. Subscribe for more reaction videos. I do part. God, look at this. The channel will be in the description below. Bye for now, and then subscribe for more videos in the future. See you next time.